Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Weirdly Cosmic podcast with me, Louise Eddington, the Cosmic Owl of Cosmic Owl Astrology. And before we get into the podcast and I introduce my tea guest today, we're both going to be having tea. I would like to remind you to subscribe to my channel if you're on YouTube, and maybe give the bell a little check too, so you get notified when I upload new videos. But of course, it's also available on iTunes and all places where people listen to podcasts. So iTunes reviews are always welcome as well. And today I have with me another guest talking about the centaurs. I did interview my friend Shelley Entine about Shericlo a little while ago, so you can find that on my channel. And Shelley introduced me to David Leskowitz. Am I saying that right, David? I should have said that. Yes. And both David and Shelley are contributors to a book on centaurs that's coming out. Do you have a date yet? I know when I interviewed Shelley, there was no.
Hopefully we're in the final surge, maybe end of summer we could optimistically hope for. Thank you.
Not too long then. And if anybody is interested in the book or being notified when it's published, it's Pricesepi Press, and I'll put the link in the show notes. You can enter your email and you will get notified when the book's published. I've entered mine, and I can't wait to read the book, to be quite honest, because centaurs are my new obsession. And so David, first, let me tell you, David, before we get into an introduction from you, let me tell you what blew the lid off my interest in centaurs is the day I actually heard of, I'd heard the name before of Pholus, but I hadn't studied them. But I was listening to Melanie Reinhardt, who's also in the book, and she talked about Pholus, and on that day to the minute, Pholus was conjunct my first house Saturn in Capricorn. So
right,
he kind of blew the lid off my interest in centaurs that day.
That's how it happens. We meet them when they happen to be transiting important planets in our chart, always without fail.
Exactly. Right. So David, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long you've been an astrologer, why centaurs? Because you've done a lot of work on centaurs, right?
Yeah, that's right. For me, the two topics arrived in my life at the same time. I learned about the centaurs in my very first astrology reading, and then I happened to get a program that showed me a dozen centaurs. It's called Chiron with a K, and so that was just a good, happy stroke of luck that got me to never look at a chart without a centaur in it, basically. And I happen to have two notable transits in the beginning of my astrology world opening, which was in 2010, 2011. And so Chiron and Neptune were conjunct at the end of Aquarius at that time. And that happened to be at my closing Chiron square transit, which is such a crucial life cycle event, which really the synthesis of Chiron and Neptune, which may be hard to articulate, but just a fascination and need to understand the mystical and truth of reality, perhaps, maybe even through some kind of healing journey. They were approaching my ascendant in Pisces together. And so I was at the conclusion of working for a spiritual organization, and through that, I had a series of fortunate events occur to me, which really blew the lid off of my own energetic consciousness, we could say, things like that. And quite normal events within, spiritual practice, whether you're practicing in really any kind of embodied tradition. But so these kind of events for me afterwards, when I was looking back at them with the benefit of hindsight and astrological symbolism, courtesy of the centaurs, then it was very clear that, just as you shared, that the same things happen alongside really notable transits, And so for me, it was interesting because there were the Chiron transits for sure, but then the nymph centaurs you already mentioned, Chariklo and their daughter, Chiron and Chariklo's daughter, Okyrhoe, was really fortunately placed for me as well. And in a way that kind of shows the whole centaur process, because she kept highlighting various key points in my chart over the year and a half, which was the really crucial time period for me. So it was very clear. And so we will get into Okyrhoe's story, but she's sort of an approachable, gentler centaur with not as much trauma in the story, although there are branches of that which we can get into because it's fascinating regarding world events if we want to, although there's no shortage of that. But so, as you all know, but so Okyrhoe, well, maybe it's too soon to delve into the whole story of Okyrhoe, but she quickly became my favorite, you know, and coincidentally, not a lot of people really work with Okyrhoe, so she became a bit of my special, you know, trick.
I hadn't even heard of her till till I bought your presentation. I was
cool. Thanks so much. Yeah, right on. Yeah. And you know, Okyrhoe, for me, I didn't even know how to say her name properly until I met my my brilliant partner in all things centaur healing, Jennifer Kellogg, who has a PhD in Greek. And so she kindly alerted me to the fact that I wasn't saying the final E properly. And so she has an extra syllable, and that really broadens out the word when you say Okyrhoe. And
Okyrhoe, yeah.
Okyrhoe, and that's actually the word apparently currently used still in Greece for a swift flowing river, which is what her name means.
Well, I'm quite happy to kind of dive into her straight away. Is this what your chapter is about in the book? Yeah,
that's right.
Cool. Well, let's just go with that swift flowing river and and talk about her. Tell how did you discover her? Does she have a discovery chart? Or
yeah, we should definitely look at that chart together. I can send you those coordinates, or we could just look at it together. So she was discovered in the late 1990s, which makes her one of those recent epiphanies of the centaur family expanding. Of course, Chiron in late 70s was then followed after a period of more than 12 years or so by the discovery of Nessus, Pholus, and Asbolus. But then in the late 90s, that was in the early 90s, then we had Chariklo and Okyrhoe we discovered. And I only recently learned this, that there was a beautiful synergy between the astrologers and astronomers at the time in this process of naming the centaurs. And Melanie Reinhardt talks about it a little bit in the chapter that she wrote, or the introduction for the book that she also wrote for this upcoming Centaur anthology, which is just a really kind of a healing sort of event in itself, that this split between science and spirituality that is kind of archetypally shown in usually the distrust of one and the other, you know.
Yes.
In our society, and we're kind of secret astrologers compared to the, you know, I always wonder if we had the same funding that NASA had, what could we discover as a group of astrologers, right?
Seriously, yeah. It'd be amazing. Well, let's put up her chart. How do I spell it again?
Okyrhoe. So she was September 19th, 1996.
So she was discovered before Chariklo then?
I'm sorry, 1998. Thanks for
1998. Oh, okay.
Yep, there you go.
There we go. And time?
Let's see, I have it on my phone right here.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
No rush.
And so all of this information too is really handy because, you know, in the modern era, we have the technology was side by side with it. So these planets are the first ones that were discovered in the computer age, and all of this kind of instant chart access right away.
Which is wonderful.
I've gone and closed it, haven't I?
That's fine.
So here we have it. So there's a great database called Sphinx, and they have it all. And so the Okyrhoe chart, so as you and Shelley, you know, we're really enjoying talking about the beauty of Chariklo's chart, the Okyrhoe chart has some similar beautiful details. Okay, so the discovery was 9/19/98, and that was, Yeah, I'm sorry. We have
That's
the universal time here, but
that's
this is
okay.
one of those great details. I have it on my wall elsewhere. The Okyrhoe discovery. Here we have it. She was actually on the 18th of September by our standard time. She was at Kitt Peak, where so many planets are discovered in Tucson. And that was at 2352. So we see a Cancer rising.
52 p.m. Tucson, AZ. Yeah. We have a place down in Tucson actually. So
lucky.
I look at Kitt Peak. You can't go up it at the moment, unfortunately, because of COVID. Anyway, let's share the chart.
Pouring some more tea.
There we go. Does that look right to you?
Yes, perfect.
Of course, she's not on there. So where would she be?
Great. Well, then the fill in the blank is fun because as you see this chart as an astrologer, your eye would be drawn to the Jupiter at the midheaven, probably in Pisces. And so
with Pallas Athena too.
With Pallas Athena, so important. So she was only 2 degrees after them at 24.5 Pisces.
Okay. So I'm going to draw her on.
Cool. You can do that. All right.
I can. You talk about this while.
So what's so amazing, we have this resonance with Jupiter shown here, that she was conjunct Jupiter in Pisces, one of his most potent spiritual positions. And then, as you said, with Pallas Athena, which we'll get into. But this is one of those gifts from the cosmos where Okyrhoe has a 24 and some odd year orbit. And so she's in a 2-to-1 resonance with Jupiter, who's the 12-year orbit.
Oh.
And so that they were discovered together means that I think at every Okyrhoe return to this, more or less, then it means that they will be conjunct.
Okay. Oh, so she's got a really fast orbit compared to.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what makes her this kind of friendly centaur. That we can also look at her her orbit chart in there. But what she does is, I think, technically she is a centaur because she does pass the realm of Saturn, but only just. And so she's almost like an asteroid who lives mostly between the realm in space per distance between Jupiter and Saturn. She just peeks out past Saturn. Right.
Some of these definitions, though, the astronomers get so uptight about them. I mean, Charicle's got rings, right? So is she a centaur or is she a planet?
I just learned that she might be reconsidered a dwarf planet soon because as the largest centaur. That's nice.
So I don't take their definitions too much to heart. These bodies still kind of have their effect on us. So tell me what else
well, so she was opposite most of the time. Actually, they're found opposite the sun because they're at the kind of the illumination at their opposition point. So that holds true. But it's kind of nice that it was at the new moon conjunct.
Oh yes,
Venus
very much. And in Virgo,
and in Virgo with Mercury. So there's a lot of strength in this chart, a lot of dignity.
One thing I notice is her north node on Regulus.
Oh, great. Right. Back when Regulus was...
After Regulus has changed signs into Virgo.
After that. Yeah.
Great. Because I think we're moving into kind of this more, for want of a better term, kind of divine feminine priestess kind of age. And Virgo is, to my mind, very much the energy of the priestess energy. So
great. Right. And then the Pallas Athena is prominent in the chart as a certain kind of priestess energy for sure.
Oh, definitely.
I think that Jupiter Pallas energy really combines in Pisces with Okyrhoe to show us her character as so. Let's get into why this is such a fun chart. It's maybe a little more behind the scenes than the brilliant star pattern in the curricula one, but the fun, as you say, so the North Node conjunct Regulus, that's a very strong placement. And then we have a strongly dignified chart in this sense, but then we get the Sabian symbol, which I know you also enjoy looking at, for 25 Pisces is the purging of the priesthood, which has a lot of similar mood to like getting something done in the cause of clearing out what needs to be healed and changed, reformation, revolution, that sort of thing. Yeah. But then also, I forget, you may have encountered it, of course, in my presentation that you got, but the Sabian symbols are so powerful. And in this case, I think it's perfectly valid and useful symbol, but there's a retranslation of them in modern times by one of my favorite American astrologers, John Sandbach.
Oh, I love him.
Right, because I noticed you saw the Chandra symbols as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I knew he'd retranslated them. So what did he translate this one to?
This one, he saw 25 Pisces as at the river singing and purification by water.
Oh, I love that.
And that's just a great ritualistic healing moment. But then we see that the water, of course, Pisces is water anyway, but so this Okyrhoe, which means swift water, and as a centaur, she's involved with this kind of spiritual purification. So it's perfect that she was discovered at this degree. And then for those who like the stars instead of the signs or whatever, we have that in the background here, this was in the constellation Pegasus, and happens to be right around the fixed star Markab or Alpha Pegasi, which is the bright star of Pegasus. So that's interesting, but it took me a while to notice that was, because the Pegasus myth, as I had learned it, wouldn't necessarily come to mind, or maybe in some ways it does. I actually kind of forget it at this moment, but the reason why is that, so with myths and stories and all the centaurs, there's always another telling and another recension of what happened and who knows what really happened. But one of the several metamorphoses stories of how, so Okyrhoe was born almost like a human girl form, like a nymph embodied, not like a centaur, right? But so what makes her centauric is that she is turned into a mare, a female horse. And and then that horse in one of the main stories is what becomes Pegasus, the constellation. So that's one of those.
Yes, so in some respects she is Pegasus, really. So yeah, wow. I love how these things always kind of seem to flow together. Now, have you noticed more people discovering her and your work on it with Neptune hovering over her?
Oh yeah, right. This whole season has been a really dynamic Okyrhoe season with all the movement of the planets through late Pisces, especially Neptune for sure. And we also had Venus and Jupiter both already, and they were conjunct very close to that point.
Yeah, they were. Yeah,
a lot of people especially like Okyrhoe, so I do also healing work with the centaurs. We work with a bunch of the centaurs in their like present day energies, and Okyrhoe is very present for us, and many people, especially young women, I think, resonate with her archetype, and she's very approachable as a healing vibration. But so also the 24-year Okyrhoe return, it's kind of a prelude to the Saturn return. I mean, it is. So that's a very useful, it's another expansion of the Jupiter return. Every other Jupiter return will be an Okyrhoe return. So that's helpful to kind of get in the grit of, you probably understand your Jupiter as an astrologer or receiving a reading, but the Okyrhoe archetype, almost because it broadens that out in that rift between Jupiter and Saturn, the bridge. So there can be a lot of useful perspective there. Yeah.
Of course, my mind's clicking about where was she in my chart and things. I'm going to have to look her up and work on all of that. I'm thinking of my cycles around those years. About 24 and a half was a big change for me, actually. So
right, I'm sure
that's very, it was. I'm not going to go into details, but I was like, oh. And
right.
yes.
And so I happened to be 24 also when these events that I was speaking of first started to blossom through in my life. So
wow,
absolutely the same thing was occurring. Yep.
Well, it would have been my second return of her when we moved to Utah, or we were moved to Utah by my husband's company, and that led to me turning what was just a hobby, looking at learning and teaching astrology myself, to becoming a professional astrologer.
Wow, right on.
So there you go.
Yeah.
But of course it was the Chiron return as well. So,
yeah, that's a great point. So then the second Okyrhoe return then is the prelude to the Chiron return. That's really cool. I hadn't actually thought of that so formally. Thank you. Wow.
You're welcome.
And so you've also highlighted like the function of Okyrhoe, like what is she and who is she? You know, so in her myth, the reason she was turned into a mare in also the main story, though we'll also talk about the second version for another interesting subplot. But the main point is that she was a prophetess, an oracle, and so she could see everything and know everything, which is a superpower. But as we know, the gods aren't always so pleased by humans or lesser divinities who say too much.
Yes.
And so in that version, she was turned into a horse simply to silence her.
Right.
And so there's a lot of the Okyrhoe mythos in that moment. But so in our own events that relate to the Okyrhoe cycle, we can uncover our own prophetic abilities, you know, our higher vision and knowledge, and at the mundane level, simply this kind of revolution against authority to break free and our truth. So we do see that a lot in mundane astrology use of Okyrhoe.
Cool. And so what's the other version?
Yeah, well, so the other version, which again, everything is kind of revealed in due time. I just found out. Always, yes. And so the other story is that she was actually with child and didn't want her father Chiron to know. And so she asked the gods to send her into the sky. And so that's interesting. But then we also, as we've noted, you know, this was the Okyrhoe return month. The last month was when Okyrhoe has returned to this point in Pisces, or maybe we didn't say that so clearly, but that's what we meant by the whole conjunction with Neptune. She's now just returned to her original place, at 25 Pisces. And so when I realized that her secondary story, in which she's called Melanippe, which is actually her more famous name that the daughter of Chiron and Chariklo is given, but we can kind of, if we can kind of loosen our definition and say that the same character is played under different names. Then the Melanippe, which means black mare, she symbolizes, you know, an unwanted pregnancy, essentially, right? And then so this has become, you know, the last month is so fraught with difficult, terrible things that have happened in our country alone that you know, it's already kind of in the background, but in a month ago, this whole like revelation of the Supreme Court's intentions, you know, although not yet enacted, of course, around reproductive rights, and
it's coming any day. It's coming any day now.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was very relevant if we're seeing both. Well, we can get into that maybe later, but that seemed to vibrate that story side anyhow.
And you know, I think we all have our own energies we tune into, and the energy of Pisces I often refer to as the amniotic fluid of creation. Beautiful, so and kind of the unwanted pregnancy, the whole birthing kind of energy that really really fits, and with the Cancer rising on the moon in Virgo.
Of course.
Right.
Actually, now that you mention it, you know, we may get into this later also, but one of my favorite recent astrology books that I read is by Courtney Roberts on the visions of the Virgin Mary. Which is sort of an ironic parallel, but there's a lot of interesting crossover between the archetypes. And what's so well written about that book is that it's meant for the everyday audience that's not necessarily a trained astrologer. And so she hones in on the Cancer and Virgo archetypes actually as prominent in a lot of the visions. Just like really simple, like if there's a lot of planets there, it happens to match up. And just as you say, like those are very
I'm right. Visions of the Virgin Mary by Courtney Roberts. I'm going to have to read it. And interestingly, I don't know if you look at where the planets are on the day. I'm always aware of where they are because I write daily astrology posts.
Right.
We have a Virgo moon first
Right.
quarter square right now. Well, to 16 degrees Gemini. So Ceres, the Great Mother, is the so all of that mutable T square is being highlighted as we talk. So
Thank you so much. Resonant.
I know. Yeah, and
other times, yeah.
And there is a big rise in interest in working with Mary in all forms, Mary Magdalene,
sure.
all the Marys, you know.
Marys.
Yeah, and I always think Virgo looks like an M, like the Marys, so it is an M really. So I kind of, you know, I started with Shelley on this series, looking at these centaurs, looking at Cariclo, and she's the ultimate priestess. Shelley describes her as. I could see both of these as real priestess kind of figures. And I always think of the Virgo Pisces line as kind of the practical mystic axis.
Very nice. Right.
Yeah. So would that kind of resonate with her energy, kind of this practical mystic healing kind of energy?
Yeah, totally. And I think of that just when we think about the Jupiter-Saturn blend. I feel like that, which is her orbital characteristic as well, although I know that doesn't exactly match with it. But the two ways of kind of bringing the Jupiterian into our reality. And as you mentioned, Cariclo, again, the priestess, again, a story with multiple forms, but I think as Shelley mentioned that there's one version where she's a temple priestess with Pallas Athena.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that we see, like, let's say her mother's mentor so prominent in this chart, kind of guiding her into our awareness.
With her dad.
Right, with her dad. wait, sorry. With right.
Yeah.
With whose dad? Sorry. With
Pallas Athena.
Pallas, yes, of course. Self-arisen from Jupiter. Thank you.
sprang from Zeus's head. Yeah.
Right.
I know that because my Pallas Athena and Jupiter are exactly conjunct.
Great. Well, you can explain this. No, sorry, that's so funny. Mine are too. Thanks for pointing that out. Mine are in Scorpio. Right. That's great.
Mine are in Sagittarius, and Jupiter's
right.
Okay. My ruling planet. So
very powerful.
Yeah. So.
Well, and then so that's really interesting too. Then in her recent return, she was once again conjunct Pallas, I'm pretty sure. Let's see, I have that right here. Okyrhoe's return.
Yeah, she would have been, because Venus and Pallas have been traveling fairly close for a while.
Oh wait, no, I'm wrong. But what did I mean instead? I thought she was thus conjunct. No, I think Pallas is already over in Taurus, unless I'm looking at the wrong chart.
Oh, was she? Okay. Well,
I'm sorry. Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Pallas spent a long time in Aries, but I could be looking at. I look at so many different charts in one.
Oh, so do I. So do I. And I usually remember where every planet is, but sometimes you've kind of looked at so many that it's like, oof. But safe to say, while you look, you know, she's been really highlighted over the last couple of years or so with all the eclipses in Sagittarius Gemini, and the nodes in Sagittarius Gemini squaring that main axis, and all of the Neptune, Jupiter, Venus. She's been really highlighted. Yeah, I noticed that her Uranus is pretty much exactly where Cariclo is right now.
Oh yeah, the symmetry between centaurs is a really fascinating one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, but I mean, I don't know what relevance that has. So just before we kind of, I know we've got a chart to look at, but just tell us a little bit more, kind of maybe some keywords for her that you kind of think of that people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's something about like clarity of vision.
Right.
The process of having been cleansed by the waters and seeing clearly, which is a nice attribute. prophecy is very high-minded, like not everyone will necessarily be a prophet or even have prophetic moments, but to be able to channel understanding and wisdom even in your own life, and to have clarity. Zane Stein wrote an interesting article about Okyrhoe, where he saw, again, kind of a more mundane level, where someone like Rachel Carson has Okyrhoe, I think, conjunct the sun, and she, or it was somehow very prominent in her chart, and she, of course, had this fearless ability to tell it how it was about the environmental destruction that was ensuing. And it was a very kind of dark story, but she had the fortitude to just say what she was seeing about our future. So in a way, she was oracular in that way. I like that as an example. But so if we look at the myth, the side of the myth in which she was silenced for speaking what she knows, because there's knowing and then there's acting on the knowledge. So there's, I think there's this kind of the fight against the patriarchy or whatever the established power is. I think that's built into her story too. So that she comes out in the late 90s, we can kind of work with that energy more, right? So
yeah, can't wait to see where she's on my chart. Is there an ephemeris available online for her?
Yeah, definitely. So if we look at her through the asteroid numbers, right, you can look her up. Let's see, all these fast facts I usually have right at my fingertips.
I know, I'm sorry I put you on the spot, but everybody's very forgiving.
It's funny, I would usually know her asteroid number, but it's like 6 digits because she's so recently discovered, right? 5, 2, 3. Well, I can look. Would you like me to? Do you disclose your birth info? I can look it up right here.
Oh yeah, I do. I share it all the time. It's December the 14th, 1959. 8:52 a.m. Derby, which is Derby, UK.
What was the time again?
8:52 a.m.
Great. And that's Derby with an E, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, anyhow, we'll look at.
It just kind of makes me laugh when you were talking about that one chart, because I'm a little bit of a fighter against the patriarchy and such like.
Sure, I felt like that would resonate with your story. Well, this is interesting. She was at 22¼ Virgo.
Oh.
So in her opposition prior to discovery.
Ah, square my sun. There we go. I will put her in my chart. Thank you for that. So
sure.
shall we look at the interesting chart? Do you want to look at that?
Great. Yeah, you already have the seer Edgar Cayce in there. Right on.
Yes, I can get him up immediately. And where was Okyrhoe in his chart?
Well, so one of the reasons why he came to mind is that he has a late Pisces Okyrhoe as well, right?
Okay.
See, in fact, it's exactly conjunct the discovery degree. And so we see that he's kind of
so his was about here. No.
All right, you don't have the Okyrhoe. Yes, thank you.
No.
So Edgar Cayce was exactly 2443. So within minutes by degree of the discovery placement, 2443.
43, there we go. It's written on now.
Edgar Cayce, also conjunct Venus, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Pisces stellium with the North Node in Pisces, right?
No wonder he was a seer. Oh my goodness.
Right, and so his chart will reveal his truth regardless if we have all the centaurs in there or not.
Yes.
But the fun with the centaurs is we get this new layer of meaning, but we also get the timing that a new planet brings, right? And so so also as a technique, which I think you've already discussed variously, that the discovery degree of a centaur, like how Cariclo right now is opposite her discovery degree, and Okyrhoe has returned to her discovery degree, that kind of becomes a sensitive point in the timeline for all of us to hone in on that, right? So when we see that someone with great visionary power has, even more than a century before the discovery of this planet, which is really interesting and kind of mind-bending also.
It is.
So they didn't know about this. Of course, the archetype of Okyrhoe existed, and of course the planet did too, but it wasn't an astrologically awakened symbol. So it makes it feel like maybe there was some kind of foreshadowing of the Okyrhoe archetype in someone like him.
Yeah, well, I mean, that doesn't surprise me, because I think, you know, anybody that's worked with a chart of somebody after their death knows that the chart continues after. So why wouldn't it foreshadow?
Right on.
Yeah.
And that's really an interesting avenue. We can look at one death chart also after this, actually. That's cool.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and the centaurs really have a lot to do with this whole sort of psychopomp, leading between realms. You know, Chiron and Polis especially, or all of them really. Sorry.
And his in the 8th house is okay.
Sure. Yeah.
The 8th house is but yeah, I'm also noticing the Pholus. Look at his ascendant. And
great.
And of course the sun and Okyrhoe are square to Nessus. So,
wow. Yeah. And he had a really interesting life, because Edgar Cayce was like a very humble, didn't have really big goals to become kind of a spiritual leader. He was a photographer, and he just started to go into these spontaneous trances, right? Or going to sleep. He was the sleeping prophet, but clearly he was in some kind of trance state. And the fascinating thing about that is that he was 24 years old, and Okyrhoe had just passed 1 degree past this natal placement. So it was applying to his son also, very importantly.
Yeah.
When he had his first experience of being someone who knew more about the world in his sleeping state than his waking state.
Wow.
And speaking of Mary and all that, he didn't name her as Mary, but there was some kind of angelic saintly figure who blessed him by a river, actually. Actually, that's funny. His biography is called "There Is a River," which is a reference to a psalm, I think. But so wow. So he was very Okyrhoean.
He was, for sure.
He really was. He lived this.
And the prophetic, Pisces is such a kind of the sleeping prophet. That makes sense. Totally. But prophetic dreams, wow, that's quite astounding chart, to be quite honest.
It really is. Yeah, and this is beautiful, because a traditional astrologer would find a lot of meaning in a lot of the symbol just of, you know, Sun, Venus in the 8th house. I'm sure, you know, in Pisces. And then, sorry, we don't have to, but Uranus rising opposite Pholus really broadens out this kind of ecstatic ability where he's actually got to be like out of his body. Pholus has a lot to do with leaving the body, you know, whether it's helpful or not. But wow.
Yeah. Wow.
And then Carrico at the South Node. Look at that.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And it's that Pisces Virgo axis again, all round.
Very true.
It's quite astounding. And you know, I know you say another astrologer would say this anyway, but I think it does add another layer, because not everybody's a sleeping prophet. It kind of, not everybody with Sun Venus conjunction in the 8th house has these prophecies from their dreams. So.
Yes, I love that aspect, exactly, like how we find people's specialities astrologically by adding the centaurs and our favorite asteroids, you know, really brings out.
It does. It does. It's brought a load out. Wow.
What is that interesting glyph near Pluto in Taurus in the 10th?
Oh, that's dwarf planet Haumea.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that was kind of a generational trend happening.
Well, she's got about the same orb as Pluto, actually.
Right.
They kind of work in similar ways, only she is rebirth without the tower destruction.
Cool. Well,
so they're both.
It didn't kill him to be in that kind of transpersonal state.
No.
Helgol in the 10th. Wow.
Yeah.
And I love that sort of knowledge about the overlapping cycles of like Pluto and Haumea, you know, drawing some really large cycle that we don't really have any understanding about. You may have some, but you know, we love to know about like the Saturn Jupiter cycle and of course Pluto Uranus cycle. They're so relevant, but there's so much knowledge to extract from just knowing all of these archetypes spinning around these incredibly complicated.
I'm still learning that one and studying it, but it does immediately strike me that these two were sextile to the Jupiter and Pallas Athena in her discovery chart.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Because they were at 22 degrees Pisces in Okyrhoe.
Brought me back to what I wondered about Pallas, but yeah. So Okyrhoe and Edgar Cayce is just such a very concise story, because I mean, I'm sure we could look at a lot of his events and there would be more interesting information, but just how it was kind of his initiation into being the Edgar Cayce that we know of, and not just a simple man in Bowling Green who owned a little photography store. But he wrote,
I mean, I want people to buy the book as well. So I don't want you to give everything.
Oh, well, thanks. Actually, that's great. Thank you. I also do. But this is a fun fact. I also kind of just keep him in my folder of Okyrhoe stories, but I don't actually tell his story in any more detail than we've just gone over in the chapter. I do get into the Marian apparitions, though. That was my original entire chapter idea, but then I thought I would go more into a comparative approach of looking at mystics from a few different traditions. So but he's just in the intro to show how we have a clear understanding of, if you asked someone to name a prominent psychic, it would be him, and then probably Nostradamus, right? He's like someone everyone knows. Well, if we trust the birth date that we have on file for him, which was Christmas, or December 24th, 1503 in the Gregorian.
I don't know if I'll bother. Just tell us what.
Sorry. Yeah, great. But we don't have to even cast his chart, because when we're looking at the Centaur cycles, he also has the same Okyrhoe degree, more or less, within a degree.
Wow.
And so that's just one of those groovy facts that the universe was seeding us all this information before we were able to pick up on that layer. We could even say that, like, with the centaurs, they were always working behind the scenes. Now we're just able to know what's actually happening.
Well, they were always there, weren't they? So.
Yeah, I think it was Rujar who has this kind of annoying idea that they don't actually operate in our lives, the outer planets, and until we're able to grapple with them. But I don't think that's true. It's kind of a quaint idea now. Yeah.
I kind of see his point at a collective level. You know what I mean? Like when Neptune was discovered, it was the rise in spiritualism and so at a collective level, I can see that their energy kind of displays more collectively, but I think they were always there operating in the background anyway. So we just didn't know it. We didn't know they were there.
Well, right. So, so that we had this kind of, what if her own discovery was actually us, kind of first picking up on her energy, or whatever word we want to say for her spiritual power as a planetary deity in our sky. But it was just kind of, she was bursting through with her power at that time. So we happened to catch her at 24.5 Pisces. And now we see that that's always been a powerful time for her. I mean, that's a very bold statement. I can't say that with authority, but the point of actually in my chapter, one of the main methods I use is just this very simple kind of magnetic pull that a discovery has, the discovery degree has. So when
it really does,
right. And so there's even kind of like a holographic effect where even a planet that's not the Centaur, when it transits that degree, it seems to call up some of that power. And so we can see that.
I definitely see it working, because I have a quite an interest in series, now dwarf planet series, and she was discovered at 23 Taurus, and of course where are the eclipses right now, so.
And that was conjunct the Pluto Haumea Algol.
Anyway,
that's an interesting place in the sky, I think, that
it is
part of Taurus.
it is.
Right.
So if it's all right with you, I was telling David as we started, my podcast has been lucky enough to reach the point where I have enough listeners and followers that I have sponsors. So I'd just like to do a quick shout out for my sponsor this episode. and it's it's a company called Sustaeu. I don't know if you can see it, Susteau. And this is moon dust hair wash. It's actually powdered hair wash. You just sprinkle it across a wet palm, not all in one place, lather it up and wash it. And I actually have tried this already, and it's very concentrated. It's very clean, made from quite conscious ingredients. It's got no sulfates, silicones, and parabens. It's vegan, it's cruelty free, and is the packaging, as you can see, smaller packaging because you are just got powder. So it's great for traveling as well. You don't have to worry about the TSA taking the liquids through. And this is made of ocean-bound plastic, fully recyclable. So one bottle of moon dust hair wash is equal to about 4 bottles of 8-ounce liquid shampoo. So you can see that this, I'm a bit of a greenie myself, so I'm very excited about this actually. And they actually send you a lovely little hair clip as well when you buy. Well, anyway, if you want to give Sustaeu a try, I will put the link in the show notes. And if you use promo code COSMIC, you'll get 15% off your first order and you'll be supporting my podcast. So give Sustaeu a try and maybe take it on your next trip so you don't have to worry about the TSA. So let's get back to centaurs. So you said you had a death chart to show. Would you like to show that, or are you?
Great.
Yeah,
let's do that. So similarly, so a lot of my research stems from just kind of trying to find common threads between mystical experiences and lots of different traditions. I have like more than 100 case studies that I've really checked out, and one of my favorite mystics is Sri Aurobindo, who's an Indian scholar, mystic, yogi, with a lot of exposure in the West. He also wrote in English, which is a great feature. Let's see. But so
I don't know loads about him, but I have heard of him.
yeah, he's just one of those people who wrote like thousands of pages, and really some kind of spiritual wisdom was coming through him, whether we subscribe to it or not. He was a very prolific writer, even to have that many pages. And so he's someone who has still a following. He was famous in kind of the hippie consciousness for creating a commune in South India, which is still operational.
Yeah.
And so let's see, we could also just talk about it because it's another one of those key details. His chart is fascinating. When we look at all the centaurs, he has a Curriculo-Folus conjunction. But when he died, Okyrhoe was at the north node of the moon. And they were also at 24-25 Pisces.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, and that's just fascinating because
like he got called to whatever heaven is.
Right.
On that moment. Wow.
And the death of a saint in the yogic tradition is like the Mahasamadhi. It's seen to be like the enlightenment, essentially, where his goals were fulfilled. And so just even anything, relating to the North Node in our understanding, not in Indian astrology necessarily, but just that Okyrhoe at the North Node bringing this fulfillment of someone's mystical vision through is exactly right on.
Especially at that degree.
Wow. That degree. And that doesn't happen very often, that those two planets are conjunct. I should look into that, but very historic kind of moment. But then, so that became one of those fascinating figures to just kind of continue with that kind of signature, right? Like that seems something to look out for. So two also of the Marian visionaries who I do write about, both of them were born also when Okyrhoe was at the North Node in different signs, but just to really bring that to the forefront. I think the North Node is one of these great like emphasizers in the chart,
I can't wait to get this book, honestly. It's
neither can I. Thank you. Well, we're working hard on it. So the thing is, we have 12 amazing writers, authors, and this has been such a year of challenge, in the world and in everyone's lives. Even if we have it pretty good, it's really hard to maintain focus and work on our own constant healing process through all of the everything that's going on in the collective and in our own lives. So, and I'm a Libra with a lot of Pisces, so I'm not exactly like a hard-nosed boss kind of figure. And
Yeah.
so I understand everyone's process. So, you know, the original, I thought we would have the book by now, I could safely say. But the fact that we still have 12 people working hard at this, led by Melanie Reinhardt, who wrote the introduction and a wonderful chapter on Cariclo. And then Brian Clark as well contributed his understanding of the Chiron cycle, the psychology of like what we were talking about, the squares and oppositions of Chiron leading up to the return. And especially why I'm so interested in that is because of the elliptical nature of the centaurs. You know, a secret element of Chiron, to understand Chiron in a sign is to understand the time at which it will bear the fruit of a square or opposition. You know, that will vary depending on the sign it begins in. So Brian has written about that, and that's one of my favorite topics. And he's brilliant, psychological astrologer, friend of Melanie's.
Maybe he'd like to come on the podcast too.
Oh yeah, I hope so. Yeah, he's
a
great person to have on. And then so we've had a few personnel changes with the waves of the last year, but this is just refining our crew of very dedicated centaur scholars. We have a variety of approaches too, not only kind of more case study based, but also more just storytelling and emotional, kind of the Cancerian side of the spectrum, with a few Anandita Simon is a British scholar and healer who's writing about the nymph archetype in general, which again is one of those new, lesser understood or less spoken of. And now that there's both Cariclo and Okyrhoe, and of course there are other nymph goddesses like Salacia and various planets that we have. Maybe Sedna would be a related one, perhaps, right? Yeah, so that's someone who I'm very glad to have part of the project. And our friend Jenny Kellogg, who is a Greek scholar, a wonderful astrologer. She also works very closely with the Akashic records in a very convincing manner, which is her secret weapon to understanding what's going on with the centaurs, because we can just ask them.
Awesome. I do shamanic journey work in that one.
Yeah.
Actually, I journey to planets and planetary bodies. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Love to do that too. Yeah. So you know, I think a lot of astrologers are many splendored things, and so we all have our many talents, and so that's great to know. Yeah, I think with the centaurs especially, there's this like need to really access them beyond the page. And you know, Melanie Reinhardt herself also leads wonderful visionary journeys, which I experienced in a recent workshop. And I was impressed by how the reality of the cave in which we met Chiron in, you know. I also do a certain kind of attunement with the centaurs, and Jenny and I do that together. It's an important part of what the centaurs are doing for us. Although the personal journey that we can understand through looking at our transits and cycles, that's where we get the astrological healing from, of course, and just kind of perspective, how things have meaning in our lives. But it's both,
And of course, I've just had my Cariclo return, so that's why it's all really as well as Pholus being exactly. Well, he's going over my Saturn again because he's retrograde at the moment. So they're all speaking to me, and my progressed sun is on my Chiron.
Okay, that's a really nice example too. Thanks for sharing of how they often come at us together as a team. And so I think it's so important that we learn about all the centaurs, because then we can really get the full holistic pattern that's happening.
Which is why I can't wait for the book and why I'm interviewing you all. Because Nessus is also square my Jupiter Pallas conjunction as well. So
so Jenny will be writing about Nessus. So we've got some Nessus presence. A great young astrologer, Andrienne, is going to be writing about Asbolus, who's also one of those lesser known but very powerful centaurs. And then my dear friend Bobby Williams, who's also an astrologer who's a psychic, has kind of interviewed all of the centaurs, and so there's about half dozen of them, and they speak
I love
through
that
her very convincingly. and kind of some unexpected aspects of their personalities come out in that way. And Bobby is, by the way, someone who really helped me in the early stages of my centaur unfolding to really know that this was a true path of mine and not some kind of crack in the seams, but seeing the light coming through and opening that wider. So I was really grateful that she wants to be part of this. And let's see, we've got our friend Hugh Smiley, who's also someone who's led more of an embodied and psychological approach to working with the centaurs for a number of years. And then we have we have wonderful people. Cameron Allen, who I think is one of the leading astrologers of my generation. Very
excited.
excited.
Cameron. Yeah.
Great. Yes.
Yeah.
He's writing on healing and Chiron, and that, you know, in his famous embodied approach to astrology. And then my friend Priya Kale will be writing another aspect of the Chiron cycle, this whole spiritual journey from the more actually traditional Hindu yogic side, which she can speak as both a yogi and a astrologer. So that's really great.
I think this is all amazing. And
of Shelley and myself, right? There we go.
Of course, yeah. and you know, I've really enjoyed learning more about Okyrhoe from you, and I want to kind of know more about her. But you know, would you kind of have any final message from her? Do you kind of speak to them yourself? Because she
well, also from the context of the year and where we're at before any channeled message may come through, that her, you know, she's the interplay she's had with Nessus through Neptune now is such a broad range of material, like emotional material, that there's so much healing emotionally to happen in just the past year. And then she's actually going retrograde this summer, so we'll replay this whole Neptune conjunction.
Oh wow.
Before she eventually moves on into Aries next year.
Will she go back to her discovery degree?
I think yes, she does. Yeah,
yes,
right. So
yes.
this is a long. So yeah, I guess on the also less spiritual side of that world, very spiritual because it involves our lives at a very spiritual level of love and reproduction. But I think this whole story is not yet over with how we relate, you know, just in our own political sphere right now.
Yeah.
And I almost saw that was a hopeful sign that whenever a centaur is involved, like how Chariklo was really involved in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of last year or a couple of years now. And I feel like there's a glimmer of hope when they're present because they have a bigger picture to tell us, and it's not done yet, you know? So I think the Okyrhoe story that we're learning now is to really trust the information that comes through us. Although anything astrological applies to, you know, the full spectrum of humanity. So there can be like a madness to a centaur too, you know, where it doesn't always help us do the right thing. So I'm like, you know, it's uneasy to say something definite will happen due to one transit, you know, because you know how it goes. Everyone.
And I'm not a very predictive kind of astrologer anyway.
You know,
it's kind of more, I look at it more as kind of opportunities, really. So we choose to tune into the kind of higher energy of it if we choose to. We can choose not to and go the other way.
Right. So by tuning into the higher energy, we embody it and we can channel the energy. I think Okyrhoe is very easy to access vibrationally, and we can sort of get a glimpse of her whenever we really just commune with a beautiful flowing water, you know, a stream or river. And I think we can, that's so innate in us, this as the symbolism comes through conjunct to Neptune and at this watery degree of purification through water, that there is, the message is in that sensation, I think, without thinking or speaking about it. And that, you know, we have the baptism, we have any kind of purification by water that's nothing unusual. We all bathe to purify, you know, it's something. So in seeing her work through the collective, kind of being blessed by Jupiter and Venus before her return, there's one like phase of maturation that she's coming through. And I think the Okyrhoe-Neptune conjunction can be one of the most beautiful, opportunities to channel clear information, but you have to already have a good relationship with Neptune to do that. So again, like when we see, we see the obvious transits happen, and then they become notorious because the people with the worst influences enact on those influences. So we see bad things, but we can act on our strong influences where we have the spiritual training to tune into, and then they can be our guides too.
Being very Jupiterian, I'm always hopeful for the latter.
But so of course it's unfortunate that's how the world works, that there are influences, and we learn. But so, as like you mentioned already, that we've kind of deduced that Okyrhoe relates to the Saturn return and Chiron return both. And that's the story of growing up, I don't know, becoming whole.
It is. And I'm probably gonna have to buy that software. Chiron with a K, you say?
Oh yeah. And it's also on the iPhone, which is a really handy way to have the centaurs available, and that's not expensive at all. I think it's $10. So
I'll be downloading that right after this then, because I'd like to.
My sponsor thing is KAIRON. And like all software, there's quirks, and you have to kind of learn to work with it, but it's pretty good. It's reliable and has a lot of the asteroids and centaurs built right in, so really handy way to learn about where they are at any moment.
I mean, Astro Gold keeps adding them all the time. I'm sure they'll add more centaurs, but they're not there right now, and I want.
And that's the thing, that it's about 10%. It's only like, it's less of an investment than Astro Gold, so you can get Chiron for your desktop and iPhone and not have to spend as much on it.
Well, David, where can people find you if they want to know more? I know you've got various articles out there. I know there was one for the Oprah magazine. I found.
That was late 2019, where it proved that I was not much of a predictive astrologer, because I didn't talk about what happened in 2020 very reliably. But it's just an ironic moment in my career arc there. But that was also put on astro.com, and I was very glad to see my name in lights there. So that's the that's talking about Cariclo's role in 2020. That's still valid and useful. Thanks. So all my links are at centaurs.space is my main website. You can check out my articles and classes there. And then my work with the centaurs as healers and collective channeling of information and healing is through centaurhealing.earth. But you can also just click the link on my first website.
Cool.
And then praesepe.press, which is PRAESEPE, is where you can access.
I didn't realize you were the publisher.
Yes, I'm the so-called publisher. I have my Mars and Sag is in the 9th house, so I'd like to activate my publishing power there.
Oh, what degree is your Mars?
8 or 9.
Oh, mine's 7 in 7.
Oh, right, very close. Mars is, look at that.
You're
sort of
there you go.
Redheadish manifesting Antares power. That's great. Let's see.
All right then.
I feel like
Anything
so just the fact that I'm a publisher kind of came about as the need to get this book together, and we'll see what else we have the opportunity to bring through. There's definitely a chance that we'll have multiple volumes of the Centaur anthologies, because there's a need to bring this information together. So many people ask me, well, how can I really learn about Okyrhoe or Cariclo? And there's so many levels to each of their stories and understandings that
there's really not a lot out there.
Right. So it's a great opportunity for us to take control of the information and put it into a reliable way. And Melanie Reinhardt herself is advising the project at all times, and she's a wonderful mentor to all of us. And of course, mostly how I learned about centaurs is through her writing. But even in her published work, that hasn't been updated in more than 20 years now. So we want to see more Melanie in print, so.
Yes, we do. Well,
her article is fabulous. Her chapter is really great. Also, it's an update of something that she wrote also 20 years ago.
Wow.
And now she's seeing it through the lens of Cariclo in Aquarius and all of that. And so
Yeah.
Stay tuned. Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, very exciting. It's been a real pleasure. And please go and, you know, put your email in to get notified when the book is released, and grab your copy. I think it's going to be such an important addition to astrological kind of wisdom, whatever you want to call it. It's much needed. So thank you, David. It's been a real pleasure.